Welcome to another episode of the TOA On Air podcast. And today I'm joined by Katie Rae, CEO and Managing Partner at MIT's The Engine. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
So maybe we start a little bit with kind of your venture into the startup industry. You're called a veteran in the media of the Boston
that just means you're old.
Yeah, it's probably going to happen to me now.
Yeah.
Experienced. Let's call it
yes.
experienced.
Okay, fine.
And you have led Techstars in Boston for many years. But like, how did you initially enter that space, actually?
Early stage investing. Well, for many years, I mean, I've worked in tech many more years on the management side, operating side, as we all like to say. And I helped a whole bunch of people think through their companies, start their companies, and often was an early angel investor. For many years, I was also married to an entrepreneur, so we worked on a lot of ventures together as well. And that really just started, probably a decade before really working on company creation. And then I did a stint at Microsoft with my current business partner, Reed Sturdivant, working for Ray Ozzie, who was the one who replaced Bill Gates at Microsoft. So we were doing some really interesting things in what we called Microsoft Startup Labs. That really got me to really think through early stage investing and start really creating a thesis about stage, why you would invest early, how you could help those entrepreneurs. So between my experience working with entrepreneurs and then thinking through an investment thesis and some nice angel investing that I'd done, I was like, you know what? I think I want to do this for a living. I really love helping entrepreneurs and really love people that are taking huge risk. And if there are ways that I could make that path faster, easier, it gives me a lot of satisfaction. And so just decided that I was going to become an investor, and was lucky enough to meet a bunch of people along the way that were like, could believe in me. And, like Brad Feld at Techstars, or Bill Warner, who was one of my first LPs as well, who's an incredible entrepreneur. And then just kind of got the ball rolling. And then from there, everything just happened organically.
So Katie, you've, obviously seen a lengthy period of time also, comparatively maybe to some of the listeners out there. Like, what stage of the development cycle are we in right now when you think of kind of a bubble bust type of cycle that will eventually hit every ecosystem?
I think, first of all, impossible to tell. There is a lot of capital at play right now in the markets, especially in early stage tech markets. But we are also in unprecedented times. Like, think about what the pandemic did. It drove the cycle of tech in adoption in ways that nothing else could do. We also have unprecedented interest in reversal of climate change or mitigation of climate change. I mean, the world has woken up to this. And therefore, these innovations are going to become more widely adopted and more important as you see what's happening. So it's hard to say if it will burst and when. It is definitely a hot market and an incredible time to be an entrepreneur.
Also with, I guess, the kind of added services, right, next to capital, which also is in abundance comparatively right now. Thank you, Fed, for printing more of it. But basically, the service ecosystem around it, right? Like the kind of repeat entrepreneurs who are giving back to the community with their time. People like you've started Accelerators, and now in your new role at The Engine, who give so much extra to the ecosystem and help it flourish. If you were, a young entrepreneur these days, I mean, in what context would you say does it make sense to actually go through an accelerator program? Do you think this is for everybody, or when do you really recommend someone to do it?
Yeah, so I mean, there's been a proliferation of certain types of accelerator programs where small capital, short period of time, demo day, like that kind of Techstars YC style accelerator. Those can be absolutely wonderful communities for people and a great way to accelerate fundraising and company building. But they really should be used when the company's ready to do that, right? And where that 3-month acceleration is really going to get you somewhere. So I do think there's an importance to timing there. I also think they are very well suited for software companies, right? Where a 3-month time period and short amount of capital can get you a long way. In the sector that I play in, which we call tough tech, it is more capital intensive in the beginning and requires many years of research, generally at a university, to get to that kind of breakthrough. So kind of many accelerators really aren't equipped to do companies like that. And so you've seen some dabbling in that, but generally it takes a longer time frame. They can be extremely valuable companies, but the time frame in the beginning to get them right and the capital needed is more.
So tell us a little bit about the approach that you're taking with the engine. You have a fund, you provide capital, but you also have a programmatic approach. It also is, referred to as an accelerator program, correct? Tell us a little bit about how the program works. Who can apply? Do I have to be at MIT in order to make use of it?
Yes, so we have space and labs where people can develop their companies. We also have a venture capital fund where we invest. So it's not a typical accelerator where you're taking common shares in exchange for a small amount of capital. We invest into every company. We take board seats. We are actively involved for many, many years in the companies that we invest into. Typically, they are coming out of labs in the Boston region, not always, but very typically out of MIT predominantly, but also other universities in this region. So to your question, do you have to come from MIT? No, but many of the great research that we see that should be commercialized, that are solving enormous problems, do come out of places like MIT or Harvard or BU or Tufts, where a lot of research dollars have gone to get us to these breakthroughs.
And I read on the website that, you write that sort of tough tech companies have historically been underserved and underfunded, leaving many breakthrough inventions stuck inside the lab. Are there any data points or examples, about how big this problem is?
There's probably 20 years of data on this. If you look at, software investment goes like this, things that aren't software, basically on a downward trajectory for many, many decades. And yes, there was an enormous amount of research done before the engine was launched. I mean, we're a very unusual organization. We were spun out of MIT, and that was not done lightly by MIT. That was because many of the world's biggest problems require things. They require software, but more than software. Right? Often there's a hardware component or a materials component. And today's venture capital funds, many of them are not set up to do companies like that. Sometimes the timeframes are longer. Sometimes the checks have to be larger to get them off the ground. And they require a different set of investors than typical tech companies will have. And so the reason that we were founded was to fill that gap. and get these companies spun out. So like companies like Commonwealth Fusion, like if you're going to do a fusion power company, you know that it's going to take, more than a decade. So most venture capital funds will not accommodate that.
Mm-hmm.
But the outcome could be so big that if you could change the framework of your fund, it's certainly venture backable. And so that's what we did. We changed things around enough, made the fund slightly longer, set up labs in space where companies like this could be built,
Mm-hmm.
and then created a community of founders who understand these types of companies and problems that could be helpful both to each other and to the newcomers who are starting new companies.
And next to capital, there's shared services, right? With
Yes.
access to legal, licensing, sort of administrative services that you provide. 3 areas you focus on: climate, advanced systems and infrastructure, and human health. I mean, it must have been tough to choose 3, right? How did you go about it?
Yeah, we thought those buckets were big enough to
Mm-hmm.
capture most of the cutting edge breakthroughs that we think will have a positive effect on humans and the planet.
Mm-hmm. And specifically the advanced systems and infrastructure, that one, it wasn't, directly clear to me. What does that encompass?
Oh, that one is quite broad.
Mm-hmm.
It could be things that could be the built environment. How do we build buildings, or what are the materials that go into buildings?
Mm-hmm.
It could be things that make us smarter. So it could be things like quantum computing or AI. It could be things that build the knowledge base. So it could be things like semiconductors and
Mm-hmm.
things that kind of run our world.
Blockchain,
And
crypto?
could be blockchain and crypto. We think that is a highly served market and probably doesn't need the engine to do more there.
Mm-hmm.
But if there were a real breakthrough there
Mm-hmm.
that we thought we could invest into, we certainly would.
And what are some of the kind of criteria that you look at? I mean, you're a very seasoned, experienced investor. What have you learned, like when it comes to looking at an application, a pitch deck, a pitch, interviewing a founder? What are some of the things that you personally look for?
I think the fundamentals are always the same. What is the founding team? Why do they care about this? Does their knowledge and drive, is it applicable to what they're trying to create in the world? And are they going to stick to it? That's always number one for me. And then the second is, how big is this opportunity? If we actually get it done, what happens? Like, what is the change that happens? How big can the business be? And then last but not least is, how well do they execute? And what do they actually get done? And that we look at all 3 of those. They all 3 have to be there for us to make an investment. And but if the team isn't there, nothing else matters. So that's what we look at.
How about like ethical implications? So on human health, you mentioned biotech before we started this conversation as being sort of one of your focus areas as well. I mean, what's your stance on how far humanity should push this border here, this frontier, and also, on a geopolitical perspective, looking at China, looking at Europe, looking at the US, 3 very different approaches when it comes to biotech.
Mm-hmm. Oh boy, that's that's probably an hour-long discussion, or maybe a 5-hour-long discussion. Let's just say that everything that we invest into comes out of a lab from an incredible technology university that spends an enormous amount of time thinking about the ethical implications. So generally, founders that we've backed are incredibly versed in what those implications are and have sorted through the moral issues there. And so a lot of what we rely on is that incredible community that we already come from. And, you know, people like George Church's lab, or there are many other examples where there's an ethicist employed in the lab looking at every single breakthrough saying, have we crossed a line? So I think what we rely on is that deeply connected and ethical community of biotechnologists in this region. I don't think I can explicitly tell you where the line is, but it is that community of thought leaders that we work with.
Top universities in the US, Ivy League schools, have been in the news lately because of, you know, a lot of scandals around kind of applications and admissions. You know, how can one ensure, you know, with the system the way it is, that, you know, also your investments really go based on meritocratic achievement rather than anything else? If there seems to be, you know, an undercurrent layer that, you know, is not always that.
Well, I mean, the university that we spun out of, I would say, has the greatest track record of meritocracy and admissions of any university. So, and super proud about that. And yes, I mean, I think there is struggle around that in the US. I'm not really an expert in that, but I can assure you that we at the Engine, you know, my investment team makes every investment decision. There's no pressure from anybody on who we invest into. And we look very carefully at who has an opportunity to get investment. Is that opportunity available to everyone who comes out of a lab where there are breakthroughs? And, you know, we hold ourselves accountable to making sure that everyone has access, which means that we measure it. And, you know,
also in terms of sort of underrepresented founders, people of color.
Yes. And we report on it. I mean, we do a whole report every 2 years on it. And so it's something that I think everyone should be measuring and holding themselves accountable for.
And with the technology ecosystem, you know, still kind of lacking that diversity, generally speaking, broadly speaking, what are some of the learnings maybe that you think you can share, you know, for all of us to help make the space more inclusive?
Yes, I think there's lots of good data on what is to be done. And a lot of it is inviting people to the community, you know, proactively going out and seeking teams and people that don't typically get funded and inviting them to the party. That's basically what needs to be done. And then making sure that people feel that they are welcome and included in understanding how to grow these companies, and, you know, given equal opportunity to succeed. And I do think that means that you've got to have enough people that look different from who typically gets funded, that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because that community is what makes everything happen. I mean, I think you know that by what you do. I certainly have learned that lesson, you know, over and over again. And so it's making sure your community represents and includes.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we've experimented a lot. Like ultimately what worked best for us, I mean, in our small context, was setting a quota. So we decided to do it, and we became the first, you know, large scale technology event that had more than 50% female speakers. And just because we saw that number kind of grow year by year, but it took actually a quota of 50% to reach it, to get everybody rallied behind it, and you know, took a lot more work than we would have probably generally put in to get our speaker roster. But yeah, so I'm in favor of quotas, even though I know that it also has, drawbacks and difficulties in
I
implementation.
think on the investment side, it is
Yeah.
harder to set
Yeah.
a quota.
Yeah.
But I think you can measure yourself on how many people you're talking to and how many opportunities you see.
We have it now in Germany. I'm not sure about the US. We do have it now for large public companies as well. We have quotas on board seats, which I think is also, something that maybe the more early stage technology world could maybe easier adopt than, choosing actual, founders or investments. Yeah, long topic, but
another one we could spend hours on.
I know
Yeah.
it's way too short. I think what would be really interesting for kind of our corporate, community. I mentioned to you we're roughly a third startup folks and a third, people from a corporate or enterprise background. Is this idea of when does a corporate accelerator make sense? I've spoken a lot with corporate executives around, all the different paths that a corporation can take in, dealing with digital transformation, reaching out to startups, building programs, whether it's an incubator or whether it is an accelerator, a corporate VC fund. Different paths have been taken. I'm sure you've been kind of exposed to many also in your prior work. And I wonder, what you saw as kind of working well, because if one were to actually look at the numbers of kind of corporate VC or corporate accelerator, successes, if we define them as financial successes, then, one would probably argue not to ever try one. But maybe you've seen some things that make it work, or maybe financial success is not even the criteria that should be center stage.
Well, I typically think that's one of the problems is that it's apples to oranges, right? A regular accelerator and a corporate accelerator aren't the same thing.
Yeah.
And the goals aren't the same, right? They essentially don't care about the equity. And that alignment with the entrepreneur should be really important to the corporations. Because if the entrepreneurs don't win, the company's probably not going to win. And so if you're just looking for innovation, that's pretty hollow to an entrepreneur who's going to put all of their life's energy into growing a company. So I always just look at where is the alignment. And when corporations tell me they don't care about the actual return, then I wonder, are they a good partner for what we're doing? Because we're aligned. We want everyone to be aligned. And by the way, there are many corporations who do that extremely well, and they are aligned. But that really separates the two groups. And
so incentive alignment, that's a good one.
Just incentive. Are they aligned to the entrepreneurs they're backing and their win? Because the very best of the corporate accelerators use the incredible resources and power they have in the market to give a leg up to the entrepreneurs. And then you see incredible things happen in these companies. But the ones that don't understand that they should care about the founders' equity and the companies winning, that's where you run into trouble.
Strategic kind of proximity to the core business, or rather really seeing it as its own kind of profit entity? I mean, I think
it's
the best
profit entity.
Okay.
You've got to care about that. You
want the Yahoo Alibaba deal.
That's exactly right.
To go through.
Yeah, I mean that's a win-win for everybody. Yahoo won big, Alibaba won big. It's great for everyone.
Let's talk a little bit about sort of the, general sort of geography and ecosystems. I mean, you are in one of the largest technology ecosystems in the Boston area. We obviously have Silicon Valley being still the leader of the pack, New York, London, Tel Aviv, then maybe Berlin. And then I guess on the long tail, it really becomes a long tail. Not much of the value is captured yet. Is this something that is going to change in the future? Or do you think, especially also with remote work and, with the pandemic sort of having accelerated this trend, but I think we've maybe said it already 10, 20 years ago, and you still have Silicon Valley being kind of Silicon Valley, and other ecosystems kind of struggling to catch up.
Communities of talent and proximity are going to win for a long time. You're going to see outliers. Everyone's going to want to write about it. But the more you can, and by the way, there will be many technology centers where there's really strong communities. I mean, look at what China's been able to do, or look at, I mean, there's a whole bunch of areas in Asia where that's true and wasn't true really 20 years ago. So, and you see many centers of excellence across Europe. You see fits and starts in Africa, fits and starts in South America. I think you will start to see more clusters get developed. It is an increasingly competitive world in technology, which is great. But I don't think we're going to a fully virtualized world. I don't see it. So many of the things we build are physical. You need people together. People like to be together. And it's what drives knowledge transfer and job opportunities and, all those things. So like, if you look at Boston and the biotech industry, it only gets stronger every year, not weaker. Or Silicon Valley with, software just gets stronger every year.
Yeah.
Even if some people move to Nevada or Utah for tax reasons, or, or it sounds hip to move to Austin, right? It's still a mega center and will be for a long time.
One question I basically, it's the only question I ask everybody on the show, is around kind of perseverance versus pivoting. And to me, it is one of the crucial questions of any entrepreneur's success. There are moments when we cross that road and we have to decide whether to persevere with an idea, a product, and maybe just keep on iterating incrementally, or whether to really take drastic changes and pivot completely. Has that been, something you see also in your work as an investor, as an accelerator? And are there any kind of mental frameworks or, any processes that you would advise an entrepreneur to do in that period of time when they face such a question?
Yes, I think the most important, let's just talk about the CEO right now. The absolute most important quality of a CEO is to gather information from many sources and make a call. You gather and make the call, gather, make the call. And you see people run into trouble when they won't make the call, when they won't reverse the call, when they have better info, right? And so, but we also see a lot of, what are the pitfalls? We see a lot of people, every time they meet a new person, they change their plan. That's a red flag, or it is a well thought through, multiple sources of data, multiple insights that should lead to a pivot. When it happens consistently, you're just like, oh, these people are nowhere. And then what you do then is really try to ground people into, wait a second, let's pick a time frame that we're not going to make any large pivot in. So 2, 3, 4, 6 months, where you're going to pick a lane and you're going to go real hard at it, and then stop and look at the data again. So, if you can be either too stuck or too unstuck, but you're really looking at the quality of information gathering and the decision making from that tells you everything about the startup. And that is a nuanced judgment, certainly from the investor side, of how they're doing there. But I can tell pretty quickly if they're running too fast on changing or too slow on changing, you know.
And you mentioned sort of this, analyzing information and continuously doing so. So would you say it is more an analytical decision making in those crucial moments rather than a hunch and kind of, decision from the gut?
It depends what kind of business you're in. There are many decisions that are very data driven, and there are many decisions that are just a hunch and a bet. And I can't tell you. We'd have to talk about the company specifically to know which one it is, right? Like if it's like a consumer brand company, yes, there's going to be a lot of data, but there's probably going to be a hunch and some art. But if it's a fusion power company, better not be a hunch, right? It's gonna be a well thought out, well executed plan.
And what about mental health in sort of startup entrepreneurship? I'm sure you've seen also lots of challenges with entrepreneurs. What do you tell people when they kind of reach their limit? And maybe they know they do, oftentimes maybe they don't see it, but you as a VC, you see it. What are some of the advice you've given in the past?
I mean, super important topic, and not just for entrepreneurs, really for all their employees, for everyone involved. It's people taking care of themselves physically, emotionally, mentally. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And the faster people get into what takes care of them, whether it's breaks or meditation or community or, exercise or all the above, the faster they understand when their tank is empty and fix it. I mean, that's just, again, it is this understanding yourself, understanding the data about yourself to know where you are. I mean, I just look at that, and, when people say to me, oh, I'm fine, I don't need a break, I'm good. And I just see them consistently not being able to make decisions or being overly tired or overly emotional. You just know somebody's tank is empty. And, I try to talk about, all right, well, what's going to fill your tank back up? What kind of things? And, I've certainly had to learn that for myself as well. Right. And so it is a journey we are all on, and every single person is different. Right. Everyone thinks, oh, Katie's such a big extrovert. I need to go hide sometimes. Like, my tank gets really empty if I am constantly on, and I've found ways to kind of do that quickly and ways to do that in longer periods. But I think, talking to other people about what they do and what helps them, I think is really important. But then just knowing yourself and knowing where you really get recharged. For me, meditation, my community of very close friends where I can relax are fundamental to my mental health. Time with my kids, dinner, feeling like I have my family and my work, is what recharges me.
And in your sort of day-to-day operations, are there any sort of productivity hacks that you deploy? You may be familiar with Paul Graham's article, Maker versus Manager Schedule. Not sure if you read it, but it's
yes, I've read it.
Yeah. And it, to me, that was actually very helpful. I noticed, how a day without meetings gives me a lot of energy. And I just, like the remaining days of the week become, much easier for me because I know that I had that one super productive day where I really got into flow and managed to do all of the important tasks for the week, even in a single day, if I have it totally uninterrupted, right? Are there
Yeah.
any such things that you do even in your setting of your agenda and your day-to-day operations?
I look pretty closely at how many decisions I have to make and at what point in the day.
Mm-hmm.
So if I hit my limit of like, and it's pretty easy to, as a CEO and a managing partner at a venture fund, you know, you're probably making 1,000 decisions a day. And the question is, knowing when you've hit your limit where you can no longer hear the information to make the decision. And I'll just say to my team, I can't make another decision. I need to go take a break before we do that. But that took me a long time to get to know, like, I am at decision fatigue, stop. And then I'll go take an hour break or a walk or something that like clears that for me. I think that's the most important productivity hack. And then the other one is making sure that you empower the people around you to make decisions and being okay when things don't go right, you know, and we all make mistakes. And I think that is probably the biggest productivity hack, is like being trusting and excited to be on other people's journey with them as they make decisions.
And the following question probably isn't a black or white type of question, but would you say in the past you've, you know, with your teams and with the entrepreneurs you've worked in the past, would you generally try to, you know, help, train, coach people to kind of work on maybe their shortcomings, or would you more often advise people to really, you know, try to get, you know, other support for that, you know, hiring, you know, delegation, and to really double down on their strength?
I mean, I think what I try to work on the most is them acknowledging what they are good at and not good at, and then problem solve for themselves about how they're going to fix. Either they're going to coach themselves up or they're going to hire others. I think that's a really fun part of my job, is to work with CEOs and founders on things like that. And it's super fun when people see one of their flat spots and fix it. It's also super fun to see when they see one of their flat spots and hire somebody to fix it. So I love that part of the job, but it's definitely not a black and white thing.
So mindful of the time, you know, last question, I want to talk a little bit about sort of the future outlook for you, for, you know, Engine, but also broadly speaking for, you know, technology's impact on the world. And, you know, we've seen, and, you know, obviously I've dedicated a big part of my career to empowering technology entrepreneurship, but I think all of us probably came to the realization that, you know, that impact wasn't always great, and has sort of culminated, especially in the last few years, you know, in a lot of negative externalities. You know, are we, you know, is the technology world, you know, have we woken up? You know, are the right kind of measures in place? Like, will we see greater and better impact, and what would that look like? What do you hope for, you know, 10, 20 years down the line, to see in kind of technology innovation?
Again, I don't think there's a black and white answer there. I think many funds and many entrepreneurs have woken up to wanting to make sure that where they invest has a positive impact, either on humans, the planet, many planets, whatever it is. And they're measuring themselves against that. And I think the ones that measure you could be an LP, you could be a GP, you could be an entrepreneur, you could be a corporation. Those that are measuring those impacts and shooting for the right areas, I think will have a tremendously positive impact. And those that don't probably will have bimodal outcomes, right? And some will be really good and some will be really bad. And so I think the more we're measuring and being cognizant of what we're shooting for, the better.
And out of the, labs and you being so close to, the tough tech, like anything you think we may actually see, like a type of innovation that you think we're getting close to?
I mean, I think there are a bunch. If you look in the energy sector, we are going to see, endless clean energy filling our grids. That's just what's going to happen, whether it's with wind and solar because we have long-term battery storage, or fusion, or deep geothermal. Like, that is happening. And a very exciting set of innovations coming to market. I think on the bio side, or bioconvergence side, we are going to really be able to cure a bunch of diseases we've never been able to touch, because technology is driving our understanding, but also ability to manufacture things faster at lower costs, so they might be accessible to many people. And so many innovations there. And then on the space side, us understanding our planet and other planets, like, that's really coming. It's like super exciting. And I'm not one of those people that says I'm going to go live on Mars, but somebody's going to, and what does that open up for us? So many things. And it's just I think it's a very exciting time to be alive. I think there's a lot of negative press about everything, and much of that is true, but we don't really celebrate all the things that are happening that are going to improve our lives, our children's lives, our children's children's lives. And, we do have to get ahead of some things, right? Look at the pandemic. Did anybody predict that so many people would be vaccinated by this point with very effective vaccines because of mRNA, and all that was developed there? I would say very few people, except those deeply in the know, thought that that would happen so quickly. There are many other breakthroughs like that are happening today that will continue to be very, very positive stories. And we've got to now work really hard to make sure those are equitably distributed around the world, so that all boats rise. And so that, there's a really interesting set of problems there that are certainly playing out in this pandemic, right? But that will be true for clean energy. It will be true for, many climate mitigation efforts, healthcare breakthroughs, agriculture breakthroughs. So, we not only have to get those breakthroughs, but then figure out how the world benefits.
That's an inspiring closing word. Thank you so much, Katie, for sharing that with us. And we'll cheer from the sideline. I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much. Really nice to see you.
Thank you.